The morning sun barely pierced the heavy gray clouds that hung over Willow Creek, a small town where everyone knew each other's joys and sorrows. For Clara Thompson, that day, June 12, 2023, would forever be etched into her memory, not just for the loss of her beloved husband, Daniel, but for the unimaginable cruelty that followed. Clara, at 62, had lived a life full of love and quiet contentment. She and Daniel had built a modest but happy life together in their cozy farmhouse, surrounded by fields of wildflowers and the laughter of their 3 children, now grown and scattered across the country. Daniel, a gentle man with a quick smile and a knack for fixing anything broken, had been her anchor for 40 years. When his heart gave out that morning, it was as if the world itself had stopped spinning. Clara sat by his hospital bed, holding his hand as the monitors flatlined. The doctors had done all they could, but a sudden heart attack had stolen him away too quickly for goodbyes. She felt hollow, her grief a heavy stone in her chest. The hospital room was cold, sterile, and the nurses' soft condolences couldn't penetrate the fog of her shock. She barely noticed when Daniel's sister, Margaret, arrived to drive her home. Margaret's husband, Tom, and his 4 brothers, men Clara had known for decades as part of the extended family, were waiting at the farmhouse when they arrived. The brothers-in-law, Tom, Richard, Paul, Carl, and Stephen, had always been a boisterous bunch, their rough edges softened by years of family gatherings, barbecues, and shared holidays. Clara had never felt unsafe around them, though their loud voices and occasional crude humor could be overwhelming. That day, however, something was different. The air in the farmhouse felt charged, like the moment before a storm breaks. Margaret, tearful and distracted, excused herself to make phone calls to inform the rest of the family. Clara, still numb, sat in the living room, staring at the worn armchair where Daniel used to read his newspapers. The brothers lingered, their presence filling the small space with an uneasy energy. Tom poured whiskey from a bottle someone had brought, passing glasses around. Clara declined, her hands trembling as she clutched a tissue. "You need to eat something, Clara," Richard said, his voice gruff but not unkind. He pushed a plate of sandwiches toward her, leftovers from the hospital waiting room. She shook her head, unable to imagine food. The men exchanged glances and Clara sensed a shift, though she couldn't pinpoint why. The afternoon blurred into a haze of condolences and casseroles dropped off by neighbors. By evening, most visitors had left, but the brothers stayed, their voices growing louder with each drink. Clara wanted to be alone, to crawl into bed and let her grief consume her, but she felt obligated to stay downstairs, playing the role of the composed widow. That's when it began. Tom, the eldest, started with a comment about Daniel's life insurance, something about how Clara would be set for life. His tone was off, not quite joking but not entirely serious either. Paul chimed in, asking if she'd sell the farmhouse now that she was all alone. The words stung, but Clara brushed them off, assuming they were just clumsy attempts at conversation. Then Stephen, the youngest and most volatile, leaned closer, his breath heavy with whiskey. "You know, Clara, you're still a fine-looking woman. Danny was a lucky man." The others laughed, but it wasn't a kind laugh. It was sharp, predatory. Clara's stomach twisted. She stood to excuse herself, but Carl blocked her path to the stairs, his bulk filling the doorway. "Where you going, Grandma?" he said, using the nickname the family had given her after her first grandchild was born. The word, once warm with affection, now felt like a weapon. Clara's heart pounded. She was alone with these men she'd trusted, in her own home. What happened next was a blur of terror and pain. The brothers' words turned cruel, their hands rough. They mocked her grief, her age, her vulnerability. Clara fought back, her voice hoarse from pleading, but her strength was no match for theirs. By the time they left, stumbling out into the night, Clara was crumpled on the kitchen floor, blood seeping from a cut on her lip, her body bruised and her spirit shattered. She didn't call the police. Shame and shock kept her silent. She cleaned herself up, her hands shaking as she washed the blood from her face. The farmhouse, once a haven, now felt like a prison. She locked every door, drew every curtain, and sat in the dark replaying the horror. How could men she'd known for years, men who'd eaten at her table, turn into monsters? And how could she face the world after this, when the weight of Daniel's death was already crushing her? The days that followed were a fog. Clara avoided mirrors, unable to look at the bruises on her arms or the hollow look in her eyes. She told Margaret she wasn't feeling well when her sister-in-law offered to visit. She ignored calls from her children, unable to find words to explain her silence. The brothers acted as if nothing had happened, sending condolence cards and even stopping by once, though Clara didn't answer the door. Their casual cruelty haunted her, but so did her own silence. Why hadn't she screamed louder, fought harder, told someone? Clara's grief for Daniel became tangled with her trauma. She stopped tending the garden, let the dishes pile up and barely ate. The farmhouse, once filled with love, became a tomb for her spirit. But deep within her, a spark of defiance flickered. She wasn't ready to let those men destroy her completely. Not yet. One evening, as she sat in Daniel's armchair, clutching his old sweater, Clara made a decision. She couldn't undo what had happened, but she could reclaim her life. She didn't know how, but she knew she had to try. The first step was telling anyone what had happened. The thought terrified her, but it was a start. She picked up the phone and dialed her daughter Emily, who lived 3 states away. When Emily answered, Clara's voice broke as she whispered, "I need you to come home." Emily arrived 2 days later, her face a mix of worry and exhaustion from the long drive. At 35, she was the spitting image of Clara in her younger years. Same chestnut hair, same stubborn jaw. But where Clara's eyes had once sparkled with warmth, they now carried a weight Emily couldn't ignore. "Mom, what's wrong?" Emily asked, dropping her suitcase in the hallway. Clara hadn't told her anything over the phone, only that she needed her. Now, sitting at the kitchen table, Clara struggled to find the words. The shame was a physical thing, a knot in her throat. How do you tell your daughter that the men she'd called uncles had betrayed her mother in the worst way? Emily sensed the gravity of the moment and sat quietly, her hand resting on Clara's. Finally, Clara spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. She told Emily everything. Not the graphic details, but enough. The brothers' drunken cruelty, the way they turned her home into a place of fear, the blood and bruises she'd hidden. Emily listened, her face paling, her hands tightening into fists. When Clara finished, Emily was silent for a long moment. Then she stood, crossed the room, and pulled her mother into a fierce hug. "I'm so sorry, Mom. You didn't deserve this. None of it." Tears streamed down Emily's face, but her voice was steady with resolve. "We're going to make this right." Clara shook her head. "I don't know if I can face them, Em. Or anyone. What will people think? They'll say I should have fought harder, or that I brought it on myself by letting them stay." Emily's eyes blazed. "No one gets to blame you for this. Not them, not the town, not anyone. They're the ones who did this, and they're going to answer for it." Over the next few days, Emily became Clara's anchor. She cooked meals, cleaned the house, and sat with her mother through long silences. But she also pushed Clara to act. "We need to go to the police," she said one morning over coffee. "You don't have to do it alone, but you need to do it. For you and for anyone else they might hurt." Clara resisted at first. The thought of sitting in a police station, recounting the assault to strangers, made her stomach churn. But Emily's persistence, coupled with her own growing anger, began to shift something inside her. She wasn't just a victim. She was a survivor, and survivors don't stay silent. The police station was as intimidating as Clara had feared. The officer who took her statement, a kind-eyed woman named Detective Sarah Brooks, listened without judgment. Clara's voice shook as she spoke, but Sarah's steady presence gave her courage. Emily sat beside her, holding her hand, as Clara described the events of that night. Sarah took detailed notes, asking gentle but thorough questions. When Clara finished, Sarah looked her in the eye and said, "You're incredibly brave for coming forward, Mrs. Thompson. We're going to do everything we can to hold these men accountable." The investigation began swiftly. The brothers were questioned, and Clara's heart raced when she learned they'd denied everything, claiming she'd been hysterical with grief and must have misunderstood their intentions. But physical evidence, the bruises documented by a doctor Emily insisted Clara see, supported her story. Sarah also found inconsistencies in the brothers' alibis, and a neighbor reported seeing their truck parked at Clara's house late that night. As the investigation unfolded, Clara faced another challenge: the town's reaction. Willow Creek was small, and gossip spread like wildfire. Some neighbors rallied around her, bringing meals and offering support, but others whispered that she was causing trouble for a good family. Margaret, Daniel's sister, was devastated to learn what her husband and his brothers had done. She came to Clara, tears in her eyes, apologizing and promising to stand by her. But the brothers' wives, including Margaret, were torn, grappling with their own shock and denial. Clara's other children, Michael and Sarah, arrived to support her. Michael, the eldest, was furious, ready to confront the brothers himself until Emily talked him down. Sarah, the youngest, spent hours researching legal options and support groups for survivors. Together, they formed a protective circle around Clara, shielding her from the town's judgment and their own grief over their father's death. One evening, Clara found herself in the garden, pulling weeds for the first time since Daniel's death. The act was small but grounding, a reminder that life could still grow from broken soil. Emily joined her, and they worked in companionable silence. As the sun set, Clara said, "I don't know if I'm strong enough for what's coming, Em. The trial, the stairs, all of it." Emily squeezed her hand. "You're stronger than you know, Mom. And you're not doing this alone." Clara nodded, feeling the truth of her daughter's words. The road ahead would be hard, but she was beginning to see a path through the pain. She wasn't just fighting for herself. She was fighting for the woman she'd been before that night, and for the woman she still wanted to become. The trial was set for 6 months later, a period that tested Clara's resolve in ways she hadn't anticipated. The legal process was slow, with delays and motions that dragged her pain into the open again and again. The brothers had hired a high-powered lawyer who painted Clara as an unreliable witness, confused by grief and medication. It was a tactic designed to discredit her, but it only fueled her determination. Clara worked with a therapist, Dr. Linda Hayes, who specialized in trauma. At first, Clara was skeptical, afraid to unearth the raw emotions she'd buried. But Linda's gentle guidance helped her untangle her grief for Daniel from the trauma of the assault. Through their sessions, Clara began to see herself not as a victim, but as a woman who'd survived an unimaginable betrayal. Emily stayed in Willow Creek, taking a leave of absence from her job to be with her mother. She organized a support network, connecting Clara with a local group for survivors of violence. The group met weekly in a church basement, and though Clara was nervous at first, she found solace in the stories of other women who'd faced their own battles and come out stronger. One woman, a retired teacher named Grace, became a close friend. Grace's sharp wit and unyielding optimism reminded Clara of the resilience she'd once had. As the trial approached, Clara faced a new challenge, confronting the brothers in court. The thought of seeing their faces, hearing their voices, made her nights sleepless. But she prepared with Sarah's help, practicing her testimony until she could speak without faltering. Emily and Michael sat in the courtroom every day, their presence a reminder that she wasn't alone. The trial was grueling. The defense lawyer's questions were invasive, designed to make Clara doubt herself. But Detective Brooks had built a strong case, with physical evidence, witness statements, and the brothers' conflicting stories. One by one, the brothers took the stand, their arrogance crumbling under cross-examination. Stephen, the youngest, broke down and admitted to getting carried away, though he stopped short of a full confession. It was enough to sway the jury. After 3 weeks, the verdict came: guilty on multiple counts of assault. The brothers were sentenced to prison, with terms ranging from 5 to 10 years. Clara felt no joy in the outcome, only a quiet relief. Justice couldn't erase what had happened, but it gave her a sense of closure. The aftermath was a time of rebuilding. Clara sold the farmhouse, unable to live in a place tainted by that night. With her children's help, she bought a small cottage on the edge of town, with a sunny garden and a view of the mountains. She planted flowers again, choosing bright colors to remind herself of hope. Margaret, who divorced Tom after the trial, became an unexpected ally. She and Clara met for coffee once a month, rebuilding their relationship with honesty and forgiveness. Margaret's own journey through guilt and betrayal mirrored Clara's in some ways, and their shared vulnerability brought them closer. Clara also found purpose in helping others. She began volunteering with the survivor support group, sharing her story to inspire others. She spoke at local events, advocating for better resources for victims of violence in rural communities. Her voice, once silenced by shame, became a beacon for change. On the first anniversary of Daniel's death, Clara and her children gathered at the cottage for a quiet memorial. They lit a candle for Daniel, sharing stories of his laughter, his love, and the life they'd built together. Clara felt his presence in the warmth of her family, in the flowers blooming outside, in the strength she'd rediscovered within herself. As the sun set, Clara stepped outside, breathing in the cool evening air. She looked at the stars, brighter than they'd been in months, and whispered, "I'm still here, Daniel, and I'm going to be okay." The journey wasn't over. There were still days when the memories crept in, when the weight of that night threatened to pull her under. But Clara had learned to carry her pain without letting it define her. She was more than a widow, more than a survivor. She was Clara Thompson, a woman who'd faced the darkest storm and found her way back to the light. Like, share, and subscribe channel.